An oil lamp is burning low in a small room. The ceiling is close, the walls are plastered smooth, and the light moves a little, the way lamplight does, over a cradle and a bed and a square of parchment fixed to the wall. There are 3 names written on the parchment, in careful ink the colour of dried river mud. Outside, the wind is crossing the flat roofs of the town, finding nothing to hurry for. And the room holds its warmth the way a hand holds another hand, loosely and for a long time. My voice will stay low tonight. Nothing in the hours ahead will startle you. There is nothing to remember, nothing to solve, and no place in this story where you are needed awake. If you drift, the story will go on quietly without you. And if you fall asleep before the lamp does, that is not a failure. That is the whole idea. The parchment on the wall is the last page of a very old story. The 3 names written on it were being whispered over cradles 1,000 years ago, and the woman they are addressed to is older still. Older than the parchment and the ink, older than almost any story that has a name in it. She was never really erased. She was folded away into margins and amulets and small pages like this one, the way careful people fold away the things they mean to keep. Tonight we will walk back through all of it, slowly. Back through the letters and the bowls, the king's glass floor, the desert of owls, the shore of a warm sea, a garden with 4 rivers, and further back still, to a wind moving over marshes at the beginning of the world. The lamp will stay lit the whole way down. Long before there was a story, there was a wind, and the wind moved over 2 slow rivers in a flat land where houses were made of the earth they stood on. Everything that hangs on that little wall, the parchment, the names, the careful ink, begins out here, in the open, thousands of years before anyone thought to write it down. The rivers come down from mountains far to the north, and by the time they reach this country, they have forgotten all their hurry. The land is so flat and so wide that the water can no longer decide on a single way to the sea. It wanders, loops back on itself, lays down soft banks of river mud, and then leans on them until they give way, and leaves behind it, over centuries, a whole quiet geography of its own indecision. Raised levees, abandoned loops turn to still lakes, channels that go nowhere and are in no way troubled by it. People cut canals between the channels, straight where the rivers curved, and the water agreed, mostly, to go where it was led. Out beyond the fields lay the steppe, low grass country where the flocks were driven for winter pasture and brought home again in spring. And in the far south, where the rivers finally lower themselves toward the sea, the land dissolves into marshes, standing reeds taller than a man, still water the colour of weak tea, and between the reeds, on islands of trodden rush, the oldest kind of house in the world. A reed house is built the way a basket is built. Bundles of cut reed are bent and bound into arches. The arches are walled and roofed with woven mats, and the whole of it creaks in the night the way a boat creaks, gently, taking the wind's weight and giving it back. The marsh people lived among fish and wading birds. In winter, the shallow water filled with storks and herons, resting on their long way from one end of the world to the other, and it held their reflections without disturbing them. And the reeds stood around all of it like a crowd that has agreed not to speak. Away from the marshes, out on the open plain, the houses were mud. Not mud as an apology, mud as a craft. Clay soil was worked with water and cut straw, pressed into wooden moulds, and turned out brick by brick to dry in the sun for days on end. And the bricks were laid into walls so thick that a house kept its own weather, cool through the worst of the afternoon, warm long after dark. Here and there, a finished brick kept a single stalk of straw standing proud of its face, where the mould had pressed it, and nobody had ever smoothed it away. The roofs were flat, reached by stairs on the outside wall, and on summer nights, whole families carried their bedding up those stairs and slept on the roof, in rows, under the open sky, because the sky in that country was the coolest room in the house. Around the houses stood date palms, and the palms were nearly a country in themselves. They gave dates and timber from their fibrous trunks, and fronds for weaving and for roofing, and in the evening they gave a sound as well, a dry, papery rattling high up whenever the wind came through. And always, over everything, there was the wind. The people of this land had a word for it, a small, soft syllable, and they said it carefully, because in their understanding, the wind was not empty. We will come back to that word before this chapter is done. It is in no hurry, and neither are we. The wind at night crossed a very great deal of open country. It came over the steppe and the sleeping flocks, over the canals lying like drawn lines of moonlight, over the reed beds and the still lakes, and everywhere it went it moved through a world that people had mapped not only with fields and channels, but with presences. Out in the wilderness, in their understanding, lived a whole family of spirits of the open air. Not one being, never one being, but a kind, the way owls are a kind, and they belonged to the night side of things, to empty places, to unclaimed hours, to the moving dark between one town's lamps and the next. The scribes gathered what was known of them into long series of incantations, copied and recopied on clay tablets. One such series was called Maklu, the way a careful town keeps records of its weather, so that nothing about the night would have to be met unprepared. One of these spirits the old incantations treat with something close to tenderness. She was imagined as a maiden, a young woman who had died before her wedding, with no household of her own, and who therefore drifted at the edges of other people's households, close to lit windows, close to warmth, the way wind presses on a door. And here is the remarkable thing, the thing worth carrying gently to bed tonight. The remedy was not a sword, and it was not a curse. When a family believed such a spirit had attached herself to someone under their roof, they could stage for her a wedding, a marriage in symbol, with its forms observed, so that she would have what she had been denied and could rest. The oldest answer this land found to its loneliest ghost was to give her the wedding she never had. She and her kin were called by that small syllable the people kept for the wind. Lil. It meant the moving air, the open breath of the wilderness. And it sits inside their names the way a seed sits inside a date. Names like Lilu and Lilitu. And the maiden's own name, Dat Lili. That is the word we promised to come back to, and this is all it is. Wind. Nothing sharpened in it, nothing dark yet. Just the sound of air over reeds, pressed into wet clay by scribes who wanted their households to sleep soundly. Said once and let go. Lil. In time, a very long time, a time measured in the rising and settling of whole cities, that syllable will drift west out of this flat country, will cross deserts and languages and 1,000 years of retelling, and will come to rest at last inside a woman's name, on a square of parchment, on a plastered wall, above a cradle. But that is chapters away yet, and nothing about it needs to happen tonight. And the rivers are still there. The land between them is the flat southern floodplain of Iraq, and the two rivers still cross it, slower than ever. And where they lower themselves toward the sea, the marshes still stand, thinned, renamed, but standing. And there are still houses of bundled reed on islands of trodden rush, arched like baskets, creaking at night like boats. A traveller can stand there this evening and hear something close to what a brickmaker's family heard from their roof 5,000 years ago. Water against reed, and over it the long, uninterrupted breath of moving air. Somewhere in one of those houses, then as now, a small lamp would have been burning. Oil in a clay saucer, a flame the size of a thumbnail, set in a niche out of the draught. The wind came to the door, pressed on it the way it presses on everything, and moved on. The flame leaned and straightened and went on burning. The family on the roof slept in their rows under the open sky, and the marsh went on breathing around them, in no hurry at all, the whole night long. In the oldest of all the old stories, a single tree is drifting down the Euphrates, and a young goddess is walking along the bank. The story was pressed into wet play some 4,000 years ago, in the prologue of a poem the scholars call Gilgamesh, Enkidu and the Netherworld. And this is how it begins. Not with a hero, not with a war, but with a tree that has lost its footing, turning slowly in the brown water. The tree had been planted by the riverbank in the world's first days. The poem does not trouble to say what kind of tree it was. It gives it only a name, Hulupu, and lets the name stand the way a tree stands. For a while, it grew where it was planted. Then the south wind came up the valley, worrying at its branches and working at its roots, until the river rose and took the whole tree into itself, roots and crown together, and carried it off downstream like something it had been meaning to collect for a long time. That is where she finds it. Inanna, young then, the poem is careful about this, a goddess at the beginning of things with her whole long story still ahead of her, is walking by the water, and she sees the tree turning in the current, and she pities it. She wades in and takes hold of it and draws it out. She did not plant it back where it came from. She carried it home instead, to her holy garden in the city of Uruk, and set it in the earth there with her own hands, and pressed the soil down around its roots with her bare foot, the way gardeners have settled young trees ever since. That small, firm treading in a circle, around and around, until the ground agrees to hold. And the poem tells us plainly what she was hoping, because she said it to herself as she worked, that the tree would grow broad, and that one day she would have from its wood a shining throne to sit on, and a bed to lie on. A throne and a bed. Two quiet hopes, held loosely, the way a lamp is held in the corner of an eye. The wood will remember them, even if no one else does. 10 years she tended it. The poem says the years passed and the trunk thickened, and its bark would not split. A tree so sound that no crack ever opened in it. In a garden watered from the great river, under that enormous flat country sky, the halupu grew from a rescued sapling into a considerable tree, and for 10 years, as far as the tablet is concerned, nothing happened at all. There are very few stories from any age that are willing to let 10 quiet years stand in the middle of themselves. This one is. It is in that way a good story to fall asleep inside. But a broad tree in a walled garden is a kind of invitation, and slowly, without asking, the tree filled up with tenants. Down among the roots, a serpent made its home. A serpent, the poem says, that could not be charmed, meaning only that it would not be talked out of staying. Up in the branches, the great anzu bird built its nest and raised its young there, untroubled. And in the trunk itself, in the hollow of the heartwood, a young woman made her house. A dark maiden of the open air, whom the tablet calls, in its own old language, Kisikililak. Drifting past in the middle of that long name is a small syllable this night has heard before. Lil. The wind again. A maiden of the wind, living in the trunk of a well-loved tree, in a goddess's garden, at the beginning of the world. One modern telling of this poem, a famous and much loved one, gave that maiden a name straight out of later centuries. It called her Lilith. The scholars who read the tablet more slowly are gentle about this, but firm. The old words say a young woman's spirit, a maiden of the air, kin to that wind family we met in the marshes. And the name Lilith belongs to a much later time and another people. Both things can rest side by side on the same shelf. What the tablet gives us for certain is the picture itself. A serpent below, a great bird above, a woman of the wind in the middle, and a goddess who cannot have her throne or her bed while all three remain. So Inanna asked for help, and help came in the shape of Gilgamesh. He put on his armour, the poem says, and took up a bronze axe of a very great weight, and went into the garden. The tablet is brief here, and we can afford to be briefer. The serpent's residence ended. The anzu bird gathered its young and rose away toward the mountains, unhurried, the way large birds leave. A few heavy strokes, and then a long glide. And the maiden of the wind left the trunk that had been her house, and flew out to the empty places, to the wilderness that had always been her family's country. And the poem does not follow her, and neither, tonight, will we. No one in this story pursues her. She simply goes back to the open air, and the air receives her. Then the tree came down, and the wood kept the promises it had been holding for 10 years. From the trunk, the craftsman made Inanna her shining throne and her bed. And from what remained, from the base and the crown, something was made for Gilgamesh as well. 2 objects the tablet names Pu and Mu'u, whose exact nature the scholars still turn over in their hands. A drum and its stick, perhaps, or a ball and mallet for a game. The wood became a seat, and a place of rest, and a plaything. That is the whole inheritance of the first tree in the first garden. And there are worse inheritances. One more thing belongs to this chapter, and it sits today in a glass case in the British Museum in London. It is a plaque of baked clay, about knee-high to a standing person, made in this same river country almost 4,000 years ago. A woman, bare and calm, with wings folded down her back, and feet that end in the talons of a bird, standing on the backs of 2 lions, flanked on either side by an owl. For most of the last century, people looked at the wings and the talons and the owls and said her name must be Lilith. The museum's scholars now say, carefully, that she is more likely a great goddess, one queen of heaven or another, and that the old label was a guess that time has set aside. She keeps her own counsel either way, as Clay does. The room she stands in empties out in the evening. The visitors go and the doors are closed, and the lights come down to their night setting, small and low and warm, about the strength of lamplight, which is, come to think of it, the light the whole ancient world was seen by after dark. Someone has left a folded museum map on the bench in front of her case, and it will still be there in the morning. Nothing in that room is in a hurry either. The winged lady rests on her lions. The owls keep their round eyes open all night, in the way of owls. And far away, in the flat country where she was made, the great, slow river is still carrying things gently downstream. Branches, reed stems, the odd loosened tree, the way it always has, past gardens, toward the sea. Far to the west of the reed marshes, another people told of another garden, one planted where a single river became four. Their book says it simply, the way one gives directions to a place everyone's grandmother has described. A river went out of Eden to water the garden, and from there it parted and became four heads. Two of the four are rivers we have already been sitting beside tonight. The book calls them Kidekel and Payat, and they are the Tigris and the Euphrates, the same two slow companions that crossed the whole of our first chapter, still carrying their mountain's water patiently down to the sea. The other two are stranger. One, called Gihon, is said to wind through a distant land. The other, called Pishon, is said to circle the whole country of Havilah, and of Havilah the book offers a small glowing inventory. There is gold there, and the gold of that land is good. There is bdellium, which is a sweet-smelling resin, the hardened amber tears of a desert tree. And there is a stone called onyx. Where Pishon and Gihon actually ran, nobody has ever settled. The learned have been proposing candidates for over 2,000 years, kindly and without much urgency, and the two rivers have declined every one of them. It does a garden no harm to keep two of its four gates unfindable. In that garden, the book says, the first human being was shaped from the dust of the ground. The wordplay is right on the surface, plain as a signature. Adam, the human, lifted out of Adamah, the earth. He is named for what he is made of, the way a brick might be named for clay. And the old commentators, turning the verse over the way they turned everything over, added a detail with a tenderness in it that is worth carrying to bed. The dust, one telling says, was not scooped from a single spot. It was gathered from the four corners of the earth, a pinch from every quarter, every colour of soil in one handful. The reason they gave for this is quiet, and it belongs a little later in our chapter. Like the wind's name before it, it will keep. The animals came to him to be named. The book gives this as work, but unhurried work, the best kind. Every living creature led past, one after another, and the man looking at each one long enough to say what it was. It is a scene with no weather in it and no clock. Herds and birds and creeping things in a slow procession, each one pausing, each one receiving its word and moving on, the way a ferry receives passengers. One tradition adds, softly, that when the naming was done, he turned the same attention on himself and named himself Adam, for the Adamah he was taken from. the earth owning its own. Then came the evening of the first day he had ever lived, and the sun did the thing the sun does. He had never seen it happen. The light went long and gold, then thinned, then began to go out of the sky altogether, and the first man stood in the first dusk, absolutely certain that the world was being taken away, that the darkness coming up out of the east was coming for everything and would not stop. The old rabbis who tell this story in the Talmud do not laugh at him for it. Nobody had ever told him about night. And the answer, in their telling, was not a lecture and not a rescue. He was given 2 flints. He struck one against the other, the way anyone would, and a spark fell and caught, and there was fire. A small, tame piece of the missing light, sitting in front of him, holding the dark at the width of its own glow. He watched it, and the night went on past him and did not take the world. Then the sky in the east turned pale, and the sun came back over the rim of the garden, and he understood, the way a person understands a tide after seeing it twice, that this was the way of the world, evening and morning in their turns forever. He kept the 2 flints by him afterward, one telling says, the way anyone keeps a tool that has worked once. The book that tells of this garden actually tells of the making of people twice, and the 2 tellings do not quite lie flat against each other. In the first chapter of the book, male and female are created together, in the same breath, on the same day. In the second chapter, the man is made first, alone, and the woman is built later, from a piece taken out of his side while he sleeps. For the old readers, both verses were true, because every verse was true, and so the space between them had to hold something. Some said the first human was a single being with 2 faces, man and woman joined back to back, later divided into 2 who have been turning around to look for each other ever since. Others read the word tsela not as rib, but as side, a whole side, half the house, not a spare beam. And the old commentaries speak, very briefly, of a first Eve, a first companion who came before the mother of all the living, and who, in their words, returned to dust. They say almost nothing else about her, and they do not give her a name. That silence sat in the text for centuries, patient as a doorway. It is the seam through which, in a much later book, a whole story would arrive, the story of the woman on our parchment. But that arrival has its own chapter, and this one is nearly at its rest. The reason for the 4 corners dust, then, the tenderness we set aside. The commentators said the first man's dust was gathered from every quarter of the earth, so that, at the end of his long life, wherever he happened to lay down, the ground there would be partly his own, and would receive him as a native and not a stranger. It is a burial thought, told without any grief in it at all, a way of saying that a person made of everywhere can never die away from home. They built that kindness into him at the very start, before Eve, before the garden gate, before anything in the story had ever gone wrong. The 4 rivers, or at least the 2 of them that consented to be found, are still running tonight. A person can stand on the banks of the Tigris or the Euphrates this evening, in a city, most likely, under electric light, and watch water that the oldest book in most houses still lists as garden infrastructure. The garden itself has never been located, which seems, after a whole chapter in its shade, less like a loss than like discretion. And the fire he struck from those 2 flints has, in a manner of speaking, never gone out. It was handed along, wick to wick, lamp to lamp, through every one of the places this story will pass tonight. Clay saucers in reed houses, scribes' lamps, watchmen's lamps, the lamp in the room where we started, with its parchment and its 3 names. Ours is burning still, quietly, as it has all night. The first man watched his small flame and learned that the dark passes. The flame we are keeping tonight knows the same thing and says it the whole night through in the smallest possible voice, evening and morning in their turns. The garden settles. The rivers run in the dark, all 4 of them, wherever they are. The book that finally wrote her story down is a strange, warm, mischievous old book, and it pretends in its frame to be nothing more than a night's entertainment at a king's court. Nobody knows who wrote it. It was put together somewhere between 11 and 1300 years ago, in Hebrew, and it arranges its tales along the letters of the alphabet, 22 of them, the way beads are strung in a fixed order so that none go missing. The teller in the frame is a boy of legendary cleverness called Ben Seer, and the king he performs for is Nebuchadnezzar, and the whole arrangement has the settled, lamplit feel of every court in every story where a ruler says, "It is evening, amuse me," and someone who is wiser than the ruler begins to talk. It was never scripture. The rabbis did not read it in the house of study. Some of them, over the centuries, have rolled their eyes at it, because parts of it are silly on purpose, and parts of it are rude on purpose, and it plainly enjoys itself too much to be holy. It is, instead, the other kind of old book, the kept kind. Copied because people liked it, passed along because a story in it would not let go of the ear. The copies that did the work for 1,000 years are easy to picture. Small pages, ink the colour of dried river mud, and on the page where a certain story starts, a corner darkened by many thumbs. Early in the book, between one clever answer and the next, Ben Seer tells the king this: when the Holy One created the first man, Adam, and saw that it was not good for him to be alone, he created a woman for him, from the earth, as he had created Adam himself. And her name was Lilith. The name deserves a moment of its own, because the middle of it has been sounding all night. Lil, the little syllable that meant wind over the marshes, the breath of the open air, the family name of the spirits of the empty places. It has travelled a very long way to be here, west out of the river country, through deserts and centuries and 2 or 3 languages, and it has come to rest at last inside a woman. A woman made, this book says plainly, not of wind at all, but of earth. The same earth. That is the detail the whole story stands on, and the book states it without raising its voice. From the earth, as he had created Adam himself. Not from a rib, not from a side, not later, not lesser. 2 figures shaped from one ground, the way 2 bricks come from one mould. In that world, there was also a name. The name of the Holy One himself, the Shem HaMeforash, the name spelled but never sounded. The one word in all the world that was kept the way embers are kept, banked, covered, honoured precisely by not being handled. Every child of that world knew it existed, and knew that nobody said it. That quiet fact can sit here a little while. It is about to matter, and then it will go back to being quiet. They quarrelled, the book says. It tells us the subject in one line, without ceremony, and we can do the same. When they lay together, he would have her beneath him, and she would not lie beneath him. And she said to him, the book gives her the words, I will not lie beneath you. We are equal. Both of us were created from dust. And he would not yield, and she would not yield. The book does not take a side, and at this distance, in this lamplight, neither will we. Then she did the one thing in the world that could not be answered. She spoke the name. The book gives the moment a single sentence, and the sentence is enough. She pronounced the ineffable name and flew away into the air. The word that held the world up held her up too. The air went solid under her, the way water goes solid under a swimmer who stops fighting it, and she rose, up out of the garden, over the trees she had walked under, over the 4 rivers braiding away into the 4 directions, and the garden simply grew quiet behind her. The particular quiet of a house where an argument has ended by the door closing gently. No one caught her, because no one could. Nothing in the sky opposed her. The story sends no storm after her, and puts no anger in the air at all. The sky received her, one could almost say, the way the open air had always received its own. She flew a long way, south and west, and the story lets her fly without comment. And somewhere far ahead of her, at the edge of a desert, a warm shoreline was waiting to receive her. But that shore is the next chapter's country, and it can wait for us until we come to it in our own time, slowly, the way everything arrives tonight. And the name, she said, the book does one last courteous thing with it, the kind of courtesy best noticed drowsily. It does not print it. The story turns entirely on a word being spoken aloud, and the book that tells the story keeps the word covered even so, and every telling since, in every language, for 1,000 years, has kept it covered too, and so does this one. That is the small silence at the centre of this chapter, and it is not a mystery to be solved. It is a door everyone has agreed to leave shut, because some things are load-bearing. She said it once, and the once was enough, and it has gone back under its cover, and the world is still up. It is safe to let it be. What is left of this chapter is only the book itself, going on its way. Books like this one travelled in saddlebags and coat pockets, were lent and not returned, were read aloud in winter and argued about affectionately in the morning, and were copied out again by whoever loved them enough to sit still for that long. It had no throne and no shelf of honour. It had readers, which is more durable. Copy by copy, it slipped along through the centuries. A story about a woman made of earth, folded in among riddles and jokes, the way a keepsake is folded in among socks for the journey. And it was this unserious, unofficial, thumb-darkened little book, and no grander one, that carried her name safely all the way down to the parchment above the cradle where we began. The margins did the keeping. They usually do. The court in the frame tale has gone quiet by now. The king has stopped asking questions, the way kings do when the hour gets late enough. And clever Ben Sira has bowed and gone to his rest. And somebody is going around the hall, pinching out the lights, one by one, until just one is left. A small lamp, oil in clay, the size of the one burning in our room, which is still burning, by the way, without any sound at all. Somewhere very high up and far away, a woman made of earth is crossing the night sky at her own pace, in no distress, bothering no one. The lamp does not try to light her that far up. It lights the room, which is enough. Everything else can happen where it happens. She flew until the land ran out and settled where the desert meets a warm sea. The old book gives the place a name every listener of its time would have known: the Red Sea, Yam Suf, the Sea of Reeds, the same long water that would one day stand open for a whole people walking. That day was still far in the future. When she came down, the shore was empty, and it was hers. It is worth taking that shore slowly, because she chose it, and nothing in her story so far has been chosen twice. A range of hills runs along that coast, jagged, bare, rising in places higher than any tower people have ever built. And between the hills and the water lies a strip of one of the driest countries on earth. Rain hardly ever comes. Dry valleys run down from the heights to the sea and stand empty, holding the shapes of floods that happen once in a generation. The bays are sand, long and pale. When the tide draws back, it uncovers wide, wet flats that hold the sky's colour for an hour. And out past the flats, under the green shallows, coral builds its slow, pale terraces, the colour of old ivory. And in the quiet inlets, mangroves stand in the sea itself. Trees that drink salt water and live, their roots arched into the shallows like patient fingers, holding small fish in their shade. Heat stands over all of it through the day. In the evening, a wind comes down off the hills, and the whole coast exhales. To the people who told her story, a place like that was not empty at all. Their teaching was consistent on this point, and had been for a long time. The spirits of the world kept to its margins, to deserts, to ruins, to waste places, to the unclaimed ground between one town and the next. Out in the wilderness, the old texts say, the hairy ones dance. Where houses fall down, something moves in. The world's edges belong to the edge dwellers. It was never a war, only a boundary. People kept the hearth, the spirits kept the open, and everyone understood the property line. So when the story sets her down on the emptiest coast it knows, it is not exiling her to nothing. It is giving her the family estate, the Wind family's oldest holding, the great unclaimed outdoors, and on it, for the first time in her story, a household of her own. She was not alone there. That coast, in the story's understanding, was thick with her kind, and she settled among them. And there were children, many children, children daily, a nursery the size of a coastline. The book calls them Lilin, and inside that word, one more time, the old syllable, Lil. Children of the wind, born within sound of the sea, in the shade of mangroves, on the last shore of the world. The story does not describe her days there, and its silence leaves room for the likeliest thing, that they were full, in the way of any household with too many children, that the emptiest coast on earth was, for a while, one of its noisiest rooms. Then, one evening, the story does not say evening, but it is evening tonight, so it was evening. 3 figures came walking up the shore. They came without hurry, in the way of messengers whose errand is heavy, and their names have come down to us polished by 1,000 years of careful repetition. Senoij, Sansenoij, Semangalof. Names with the rhythm of small waves. What they wanted, the shore itself seemed to hold its breath to hear, and we will hear it in a moment, and it will not be frightening. Nothing tonight is. They were sent to ask her back. That is the whole errand. The garden stood incomplete, and Adam grieved in it, and the three had been dispatched. One imagines the third carrying the words of their commission rolled under his arm, like a man sent to read a notice, to find the woman made of earth and bring her home. The story says they overtook her at the sea, in raging waters. It is the one loud image in the whole tale, and even here the telling can stay low, because what matters happened not in the waves, but in the words. There was, in their commission, a hard clause, the story admits it, that she might be made to stay beneath those waters if she refused. It was not used. That clause can be held onto, in the drowsy way anything is held at this hour. It was not used. What happened instead is that, standing in the sea, the three angels and the first woman talked, and out of that talking came not a victory for anyone, but a set of terms. She would not go back. On this she did not bend, and the angels, and this is the strange mercy at the centre of the story, stopped asking. In exchange, a price was set, and the story does not hide it, and neither will we, though we will say it the way a grandmother says a hard thing, once and gently. Of her many children, 100 would be lost to her each day. That is the grief she agreed to carry, and the story lets her carry it without comment, and it is the oldest sorrow in her long account, a mother's, repeated daily, absorbed into the sound of the sea. It is said now, once, and laid down. And there was a second clause, and the second clause is the reason her story reaches a nursery wall at all. Wherever she should see the names of those three angels written, on a scrap, on a wall, over a cradle, she would pass that house by and touch nothing in it. For the newest children, the ones not yet folded fully into the world, boys in their first 8 days, girls in their first 20, her presence was a thing a household might fear. But never, she agreed, where the names were hung. Heard for its shape, it is less a curse than a contract of coexistence. Here is what I keep and what you keep, and here is the sign by which my side of it stands. The three angels took those terms and turned back up the shore, their errand transformed. Sent out to retrieve a runaway, they came home the guarantors of a treaty, and the sea smoothed their footprints off the sand behind them, the way it does everyone's. The coast is still there, and still nearly empty. It is as dry as ever. The hills still stand back from the water in the evening haze. The tide still uncovers its wet mirrors twice a day. The mangroves still hold their green rooms of shade over the shallows, and the coral goes on building, a knuckle's width in a lifetime, the colour of old ivory under the green. A traveller on that shore at dusk hears wind and water and almost nothing else, which is to say, hears more or less what she settled there for. There are no lamps on that coast, but far away from it, that same evening, and every evening for 1,000 years, in towns she would never trouble, small lamps were being lit in rooms where 3 names hung on the wall, our lamp among them, still burning, still low.
That is how the treaty looks from the inside of a house. A flame, a folded paper, a child asleep,
And the other party to the agreement far off at the edge of the world, keeping, in her own way, her word. The shore settles into the dark. The sea keeps its own counsel. Everyone, everywhere in this story, is where they have chosen to be. There is exactly one verse in the whole Hebrew Bible where her name appears, and it sits in a chapter about a land going back to the wild. It is worth knowing, in a drowsy sort of way, that this verse is far older than the playful book of the last chapter. Older by more than 1,000 years. Long before anyone wrote down the garden and the quarrel and the flight, her name was already resting in scripture, quietly, in a single line, like a coin left in a coat for later generations to find. The chapter is the 34th of the book of Isaiah, and it looks out over the country of Edom, south beyond the Dead Sea, a land of red sandstone and high, dry places. And it describes what becomes of kingdoms when their long day closes. The prophet does not linger on the closing itself. What interests him, verse after verse, is the after. Thorns come up in the fortresses. Nettles take the palace halls, room by patient room, the way ivy takes a wall. No siege, just seasons. And then the chapter fills, slowly and deliberately, with animals. Jackals settle in and raise their pups where courtiers went about their errands. The desert owl and the raven move in above them. Wild goats pick their way along fallen terraces and meet each other there, and the ostrich finds a place for her eggs in the warm dust. It is, taken at this hour, one of the most restful passages in all of Scripture. An emptying that is really a refilling. A palace becoming a meadow with walls, every wing and paw arriving where every crown departed. And there, in the middle of the animal procession, comes the verse. There too, it says, the Lilith shall repose and find for herself a place of rest. That is the entire appearance. She does nothing. She menaces no one. Among the jackals and the owls and the browsing goats, she settles down like the rest of the tired world and finds, the verse is particular about this, rest. But what a Lilith is, the line does not stop to say. It drifts past its own riddle, and the riddle has stayed open, gently, for over 2,500 years. And it can be held tonight the way a smooth stone is held, without any need to do anything with it. Here is what can be said, slowly. The word appears in the Bible exactly once. The scholars call such a word a hapax, a word without siblings, which must be understood with no second verse to check it against. Inside it, everyone agrees, one can hear lah, the Hebrew for night. Beyond that, the path forks, and the centuries have walked both branches. The old Latin translation reached for a creature out of its own nurseries and wrote Lamia. The translators of the King James Bible in 1611 listened to the ruins and the birds and wrote screech owl. Later English hands wrote night creature or night monster, hedging honestly. And some modern translations, remembering everything we have remembered tonight, the wind syllable, the maiden in the tree trunk, the woman of the Red Sea shawl. Simply capitalize it and print her name, Lilith. Every one of those choices was made by someone who never heard the words said aloud by the people who wrote it. Each is an honest guess at a single quiet word in a chapter about animals lying down. There is something restful in that too. Whole committees of learned men, centuries apart, all bending over the same 8 letters like grandchildren over a keepsake. None of them able to ask. The oldest copy we have of that verse adds its own soft turn. Among the scrolls found in the caves above the Dead Sea is a great scroll of Isaiah, complete from end to end, copied out some 2,000 years ago. And where our printed Bibles have the single Lilith, the old scrolls column carries a plural, Liliot. As if the copyist, that much closer to the marshes and their wind family, still heard the word the old way. Not one being, never one being, but a kind. Many of them settling into the ruins with the jackals, the whole family finding rest together. Think of the man himself for a moment, whoever he was, a professional hand, working through the book of Isaiah, column after column, day after day, dipping and writing, dipping and writing. And at this one word choosing, or simply remembering, the older, plural, windier reading, and then moving on to the next verse without pausing, never suspecting that 20 centuries of readers would lean in over that single choice. The scroll does not explain itself. Scrolls never do. And from those same caves comes one thing more. Not a verse this time, but a song. Among the fragments the desert kept are the remains of a chanted liturgy, the songs of the sage, meant to be sung by a wise man over his community against the populations of the night, the demons and the howlers of the waste places, the fragment says, and, named among them, plainly, Lilith. It is the first place outside that single verse of scripture where the name is clearly, certainly hers. And notice what kind of thing it is. Not a story, not a warning, a lullaby's stern cousin. A voice singing in the dark so that other people can sleep. One may as well picture him, that long-ago singer, as a night watchman with a melody, making his rounds of the sleeping camp, naming the things outside the firelight so that they would stay outside it. The name Lilith enters the world's written record, in other words, inside a song sung at bedtime. It has never entirely left that hour since. It is inside one now. So the word in the verse means an owl, or it means a woman of the wind. And after all these centuries, the truthful answer is that both readings live side by side in the same 8 letters, like 2 birds in one niche of a ruined wall, and they do not quarrel. And it is the kind of thing one notices at the edge of sleep. It makes no difference to the verse. Whichever she is, feathers or wind, the verse grants her the same single thing, a place of rest. It is the only line of scripture she was ever given, and it is, of all things, an instruction to lie down. The country the verse looks out over is still there, south of the Dead Sea, and it still keeps the chapter's furniture. Red sandstone, dry watercourses, the high broken places where fortresses were. The ruins have gone on quietly becoming meadow for 25 centuries. Flocks still graze the margins of that country. For anyone standing there at dusk, somewhere far off, a goat bell rings twice and stops, and is not rung again, the herd having simply shifted its weight. The great Isaiah scroll itself rests under glass in Jerusalem now, unrolled to its columns, and the desert that preserved it goes on outside the city, unbothered, professionally patient. Everything in this chapter by now is at rest. It is that kind of chapter. An owl settles in a ruined watchtower there at dusk, this evening, some evening, every evening, and turns her flat, calm face to the open country, and does not explain herself either. The tower kept watch once. Now it only keeps the owl. There are no lamps in that country, and none are needed. The owl carries her own seeing, and the dark was never a problem for the dark's own people. Our lamp, far away at the beginning and end of this story, burns on beside the parchment, low and untroubled. The verse lies still on its old page. There too she shall repose, it says, and finds for herself a place of rest. And the chapter does what it says, and reposes, and rests. 1,000 years after Isaiah, in the Jewish towns of Babylonia, people worked out a very practical way of living alongside her. They wrote her a letter, in a bowl, and buried it under the doorstep. That is the whole of this chapter, more or less, told in one breath. But it is a chapter about patience and ink and thick walls. And it rewards being taken slowly, like everything else tonight. We are back, as it happens, in the flat river country where we began. The land between the two rivers, the mud brick houses, the date palms rattling dryly overhead in the evening wind. 15 centuries have gone by since our first chapter stood here, and the country has worn them lightly. The houses are still mud, still thick-walled, still cool in the afternoons. Families still sleep on the flat roofs in summer. But the towns have filled with new voices. There are Jewish communities all through this country now, generations deep, settled here since their grandfathers' grandfathers came east. And in 2 of these towns, called Sura and Pumbedita, stand houses of study whose lamps burn very late indeed, where scholars are slowly weaving the great fabric of argument and story that will one day be called the Babylonian Talmud. Evening in such a town has a particular sound. The day's trades going quiet, one by one, water poured, a child called in, and from the direction of the academy, through an open window, the murmur of learned men still at it, turning a question over and over, the way the river turns a branch. In the pages they were weaving, she appears, not as a story, but as a set of small notes in the margins of the law, mentioned the way one mentions a fact of weather. One tractate, discussing other matters entirely, notes in passing that she has wings. Another, on the subject of hair, mentions hers, long and loose. A third preserves a caution that must have been folk wisdom long before it was written down, that a man should not sleep alone in a lonely house, because the one who sleeps alone in a house may be met there by Lilith. It is not told as a thriller, it is told as housekeeping. The rabbis of Sura and Pumbedita did not argue about whether she existed, any more than they argued about damp. She was simply part of the night side of the world, as she had been since the marshes. And the sensible response to the night side of the world, in their view, was neither terror nor heroics. It was good locks, and good company, and, when needed, paperwork. Here is where this chapter's real treasure lies. There is a household fair to imagine here. The ground under those towns has given up more than 100 of the results, a household in that country with a run of bad nights. A child unwell, sleep thin, a general sense of something leaning on the house. What that family did was not dramatic. They went to a scribe, and they had a bowl written. The bowl itself was nothing special. That is part of the loveliness of it. Ordinary wheel-made earthenware, the kind of bowl the family might eat barley from, bought plain from the potter's stock. The scribe took it and took up ink, and beginning at the very centre of the bowl's inside, started to write, in Aramaic, the everyday tongue, and wrote in a spiral, outward, turning the bowl slowly in his hands as the line of words coiled wider and wider, the way a snail builds its shell, until the text reached the rim and stopped. Sometimes, at the centre where the writing began, he drew a small, crude picture, a wild-haired figure, drawn front-on, arms and legs bound in drawn chains. Contained is the word the picture wants, with the spiral of words coiling around her like a fence 100 sentences deep. As for what the words said, on one bowl that has survived and been read, here is what they actually said. They said, "This is a divorce writ." A get, the same legal instrument, the same formulas that ended a human marriage, served in full form on the Lilith. The bowl names the woman of the house it protects, Emi, daughter of Quagi, an ordinary name from an ordinary town, a woman we know nothing else about at all. And it divorces the demon from her household, formally, permanently, with the dignity of law, and sends her away, released, free to go where she will, only not here, not this house. That, as an answer to fear, is a remarkable choice. Not a sword, we have never once seen a sword tonight. A document. The night side of the world was handled with the same instrument as any painful, necessary human parting. A signed release, a clean ending. No malice in the wording. The people of that country had staged a wedding for the Maiden of the Wind once, long ago, to give her rest. Now, when she pressed too close, they gave her the other bookend of a marriage. Both were ways of saying, "You are owed the forms. Be at peace, elsewhere." Then the bowl was carried home and turned face down and buried. Under the threshold, most often, or in a corner of the courtyard, mouth to the earth, spiral hidden, a closed door beneath the door. The family stepped over it going in and out, and stopped thinking about it, which was the point. The house sat on its letter the way a signature sits on an agreement, and the household slept above it, and the nights, presumably, improved. At any rate, no one dug the bowls back up. The habit lasted in its bones for a very long time. Hundreds of years later, and far away, in the storerooms of old Cairo, among the worn-out papers of another Jewish community, the scholars have found the same formula again. A deed of divorce for Lilith, copied out in a much later hand, in another country, for another sleepless family. Ideas that actually comfort people travel like that, quietly, in luggage, for centuries. The bowls themselves came back to the light a little over 100 years ago, when excavators at Nippur, one of the old towns of that flat country, lifted more than 100 of them out of the ground, still face down where their households had left them, their spirals intact under 15 centuries of settled dust. They rest in museum collections now, in Philadelphia and elsewhere, right side up at last, their letters legible to anyone who reads Aramaic, and their pictures legible to everyone. The small, contained figure, the patient fence of words. Emi, daughter of Kachi, is remembered by exactly one object on this earth, and it is a soup bowl that loved her. Evening again, then, over the flat country, one more time. The academies have banked their lamps. The murmur through the windows has gone to sleep in mid-question, to be taken up tomorrow. In a house near the edge of a town, a family is on the roof in the warm dark, in rows, breathing. Below them, the door is shut. Below the door, face down in the earth, a letter in a bowl is doing its work, which is nothing, just lying there, saying its one sentence into the ground, year after year. Released, in peace. Only not here.
A small lamp burns itself quietly down in a niche by the stairs, the size of the one in our room, which is still lit, and the house stands with its own weather inside it, cool and dark and held all night long. Westward again, and some centuries back, to Jerusalem. Because in Jerusalem they told of a king so wise that even the demons answered to him, and it is through his stories in the end that Lilith's name comes to brush against a queen's. The king is Solomon, and the stories about him are told in the same unhurried Babylonian pages as the notes about her, by the same lamplight, and they are among the gentlest stories about power anyone has ever told. Solomon was to build the temple, the great house on the hill, and there was, at the very start of the work, a difficulty of a particular and beautiful kind. The stones of that house could not be cut with iron. Iron was the metal of swords. It shortened lives. And a house of peace, the teaching ran, must not be raised by the instrument of war, not even touched by it. What remains is a riddle, and the whole first half of this chapter is the answer arriving at its own pace. How to cut stone without iron. The answer, said the old rabbis, was a creature. It was called the shamir, and it was the size of a single grain of barley, and it had been made, some said, in the twilight of the 6th day of creation, one of the world's small, deliberate exceptions. Whatever the shamir was set against opened. Stone parted before it, quietly, along clean lines, as if the stone were remembering that it had ever been divided. No hammer, no chisel, no dust, no noise. The smallest thing in the story is the only thing that can build the biggest thing in the story. That is the sort of arithmetic these tales love. But the shamir was not to be had for the asking. It was hidden, and its keeper's whereabouts were known to exactly one person of the wrong sort. The king of the demons himself, whose name was Ashmedaj. Ashmedaj lived far off, on a mountain beside a well, his own well, dug into the rock, from which he drank when he came home each evening, and which he kept covered with a stone and sealed and checked every day with a demon's exactness. Solomon sent his best man to that mountain, Benaiah, a soldier with, evidently, the patience of a fisherman, who carried with him a chain, and on the chain was engraved the name. The same name, kept and covered, that we met many chapters ago and did not say. It is remarkable how few tools this story permits itself, and how it keeps handing back the same ones, like a good teacher. What Benaiah did was almost nothing done well. He drilled into the well from below, let the water out, and stopped the hole. Then he drilled in from above, and through that channel he poured in wine, skins and skins of it, and stopped that hole too. And then he sat down at a distance, in the shade, and waited for evening, doing, for the rest of the day, nothing whatsoever. The drained skins lay stacked by the rocks, smelling faintly of a feast that no one had held. Evening came, and with it, Ashmedaj, huge and punctual. He checked his seal. The seal was sound. He lifted the stone and found his well full of wine. And the king of demons stood over it for a while, the story says, torn, because he knew perfectly well what wine does. And he was thirsty, and it had been a long day, whatever a demon's day is. He drank, he slept, and Benaiah came quietly down the rocks and laid the chain on him with the name uppermost, and the strength went out of the question. When Ashmedai woke and began to rage, Benaiah said only, "The name of your master is upon you." And the demon king stood still and came along. The walk back to Jerusalem is the tenderest stretch of the tale, and the tellers plainly loved it because they kept adding to it. Ashmedai, led on his chain through the ordinary country, kept doing inexplicable things, and each one, when it was later understood, turned out to be a kindness or a sorrow of exactly the sort we would recognise. Passing a wedding with all its music, he wept. Because, he said afterward, he could see the length of the marriage, and it was short, and the music deserved to know, and he would not tell it. Passing a man at a cobbler's stall, ordering shoes stout enough to last 7 years, he laughed. Not unkindly, but as one laughs at the boldness of anyone making 7-year plans in a world like this one. The man, he knew, had 7 days. And meeting a blind man who had strayed from the road, the king of the demons, chained, captive, on the worst errand of his long life, stopped and turned him gently by the shoulders and set him back on his path and walked on. Whoever first told that detail understood something it takes most of a lifetime to learn. That knowing how everything ends does not harden a heart, it softens one. Ashmedai sees all the endings. It has made him the most courteous person in the story. As for the shamir, it was where Ashmedai said it would be, in the keeping of a bird, the wild hoopoe, a crested, cinnamon-coloured, entirely respectable bird, held it in trust, and used it as a householder would, to split bare rock so that seeds could be planted in the cracks, greening the waste places one seam at a time. Even the world's stone opener, it turns out, was being used for gardening. The king's men borrowed it away from the nest by a ruse we can leave folded. No one was harmed in it, though the hoopoe's feelings on the matter are not recorded, and carried it to Jerusalem wrapped in wool, in a lead box, because nothing less patient could hold it. And then the temple rose. This is where the chapter has been going, and it goes there without a single blow. The great stones were brought to the hill, and the shamir was passed along their marked lines, and they opened obediently, cleanly, like bread being shared, and was set one on another in courses, and the house of peace went up in a silence that the old texts insist on with something like pride. No hammer was heard in that place, nor axe, nor any tool of iron, all the years of the building. A construction site, the loudest thing a city knows, and it made no more sound than a garden. Stone settling on stone, wool-wrapped baskets coming and going, men working all day inside a hush that was itself the point, the riddle of the chapter answered not with a secret, but with a quiet. The scaffolds came down in that same quiet, and the house stood on its hill in the evening light. As for Ashmedai, the story keeps him nearby a while longer, and adds, in one soft breath which is all it needs, that the demon king once, afterward, got the better of his captor for a season, ring and all, and sent Solomon wandering far from his own throne, a beggar in his own kingdom, until the wheel came around again, and the king walked home the wiser. The old tellers liked their kings humbled a little, and their demons owed a little. It kept the scales of the story honest, and nobody in it stayed on top or underneath for good. That too is a thought that sleeps well. So the House of Peace stands finished on its hill in the long evening light, and that is where we will leave it while the chapter draws one more breath. Because a house like that, once built, begins to receive visitors, and one of them is a queen. The house on the hill received its guests, and the most famous of them came up from the south. The Queen of Shavar, travelling toward the wise king with a caravan that the tellers never tired of furnishing. Her country lay far down at the bottom of the maps, in the incense lands, where the frankincense trees weep their resin the way Havila's trees wept bdellium. And the road from there to Jerusalem was measured not in days, but in seasons. Camels in their long swaying lines, panniers of spices packed so densely that the whole caravan moved inside its own weather of scent. Gold, and, this is the detail the stories dwell on with real love, questions. One imagines the halts of such a journey almost as clearly as the journey itself. The lines of animals folding down onto their knees at dusk, the cook fires in their ring, the drivers asleep in the warm sand with the cargo of scent breathing over them all night, and the Queen's own tent glowing at the centre of it like a paper lantern, late, because she was in there working on her riddles. A person does not carry questions 1,000 miles unless the questions matter to her. Hers, the story insists, were her treasure as much as the gold was. She came, the old account says, to test him with hard questions. Riddles, prepared the way another visitor would prepare jewels. In that world, a hard riddle was a gift of high respect. It said, "I have heard you are wise, and I have brought you the best of what I have. And the best of what I have is difficult." The whole visit is two great courts agreeing to play, seriously, like children with their heads together. Solomon, the tellers say, prepared a courtesy of his own kind. She was received, one telling puts it this way, in a hall whose floor was of glass, polished until it lay like standing water, clear and still and deep-seeming, holding the lamplight down inside itself, the way a pond at dusk holds the last of the sky. And crossing it to greet the king, the Queen did what any sensible person raised among real oases would do. She took the floor for water and gathered up the hem of her skirts as if to wade. A step, perhaps two, her own reflection walking upside down beneath her, dry shod on the underside of the world. And then she understood, and the hall understood, and the floor gave up its little theatre. The old story leaves the moment there, poised between two courts, a queen ankle-deep in an illusion. And it reads less like a trick than like the first riddle of the visit, asked by the architecture itself. Things are not always what they lie there being. She had brought hard questions. The house had opened with one of its own. The questions themselves went on for days, and the account is serene about the outcome. She asked, and he answered. There was nothing she asked that he could not tell her. And here the story does something that powerful visits in stories almost never do. It ends well, for everyone, with no fine print. She saw the house and the tables and the order of the whole quiet kingdom. And she told him plainly that everything she had heard of him in her own far country had fallen short of the seeing. Gifts went both ways, royally. and neither ledger was kept. And then she went home. That is all. She went home. Back down the long incense road to her own country and her own throne. Content. And the visit passed into the world's permanent stock of stories about the meeting of two minds that were glad to find each other. No conquest, no marriage forced by the plot, no debt. Two sovereigns traded their best riddles and parted friends. It is one of the most restful things a story can do, and it is told in the same low evening register as everything else on that hill. But this is a night about Lilith, and so we must add, softly, the whisper, because there is one, and it has followed the queen for 1,000 years, the way a second shadow follows a person walking between two lamps. In the later folklore, in the mystical books and the margins, some tellers wondered aloud about this queen from the world's edge. So wealthy, so wise, so unplaceable, arriving out of the deep south with her hard questions. And the wondering took a particular shape. Whether the queen of the south and the queen of the night were not, sometimes, in some tellings, the same great lady wearing different crowns. Whether Shiva, behind her spices, was Lilith come to test a king. The Islamic tellers, who call her Belize and love her dearly, kept a version of the same thought in their own key, that her mother was of the Jayen, the fire-born people of the air, and that the queen therefore stood with one royal foot in each world, the settled and the windy. None of this is asserted anywhere, and we will not assert it here at midnight either. It is folklore's whisper, not its testimony. But notice, drowsily, what the whisper is actually made of. Every time this long story has met a woman of real power standing outside its fences, in a tree trunk, on a far shore, on a southern throne, it has reached for the same explanation. She must be half of the wind. The whisper about the queen is the oldest habit in our story, paying her, in its own crooked way, its highest compliment. And the queen, like the terracotta lady in her museum case, keeps her own counsel and loses nothing by it. The hill is still there. In Jerusalem, in the evening, the light goes long and gold on very old stone, and the hilltop, where the silent building rose, keeps its outline against the sky, and people still climb up to it and stand about quietly and come down again, changed in the small way that old high places change people. Whatever has been added and taken away across 3,000 years, and nearly everything has been, one way and another, the evening light is the same evening light the story uses, and it still behaves the same way on stone. It lies down on it slowly, like something tired and welcome. Swifts turn over the walls at that hour, stitching the warm air. Below them, the lanes empty by degrees, shutter by shutter, footstep by footstep, until the hill is left alone with the light again, which is how most of its evenings have gone, and how this one goes too. And somewhere under all the centuries, the story's own furniture is put away in its places. The lead box with its wool, the chain with its covered name, the glass floor holding one last lamp down inside itself, like a coin in a pond. The caravan is a season gone down the south road, trailing its weather of spices. The king sleeps in his city. The demon king is away on his mountain, refilling his well with honest water. The hoopoe has her split seams of green in the waste places, growing. Our own lamp, the clay one, the low one, the one that has walked every chapter with us, burns on beside the parchment in the little room, and the glass floor of this chapter darkens gently to plain stone, and the hill and the house and the whole warm story lie down in the gold light and rest. Centuries later, and far to the west, in the hill towns of Castile, there were men who sat up at night drawing maps of the unseen world. And on the far side of their maps, in the end, they gave Lilith a throne. This chapter is about that throne, and it is a quieter chapter than its subject suggests, because a throne, whatever sits on it, is furniture. It means somebody has decided where things go. The rooms the work was done in are worth picturing, because the rooms matter. 13th century Castile in winter, a high, cold, wide-skied country, thin light on tiled roofs, wool cloaks worn indoors, and in this town and that one, Soya, Burgos, the small places, a scholar's room with the shutters closed early. A table, a candle, and paper made of rags, and ink made of oak galls and iron, which goes down grey-blue and dries black and lasts, as it has turned out, 700 years and counting. The candle flame stands perfectly still in the shut-in air, the way a flame only stands in a room built thick against winter. It is the same posture our oil lamp has been keeping all night. Flames in this story are always at rest. And bending over the paper, a man writing very slowly, not because he is unsure of his hand, but because he believes he is copying, in lines of Hebrew, the actual floor plan of everything. One imagines the small economies of such a workroom on a plateau winter night. The ink kept nearer the brazier than the writer keeps himself, because cold ink drags and a cold writer merely complains. The second best quill saved for rulings, and the best one rested. A heel of bread forgotten at the table's edge since the afternoon, gone hard, moved aside twice without ever being either eaten or cleared away. None of it is in the books. All of it is how books get written, in every century that has winters. They were map makers, these mystics, in the most patient sense. Above they charted the lights, the emanations, the orders of the holy, and like all careful map makers, they eventually had to face the far side of the sheet. A map of everything cannot leave the dark blank. So the question their books set themselves, gravely and without any relish, was a tidy one. What stands on the other side? And in the very shape of the asking, the answer was already beginning, because to ask where the dark lives is to give it an address. One of them, a scholar named Isaac, wrote it down plainly, around the year 1260, in a small treatise that later books never stopped consulting. On the other side, he wrote, there is a court, as there is on this side, and at the head of that court there are two. Samuel, the great accusing angel, and Lilith. And they belong to each other, and, the treatise says, they were born as one, a single double-faced being, made together the way Adam and Eve, in one old reading we have already met tonight, were made together, back to back, two faces of one form. The dark, in other words, was given a marriage, a mirror of the very first marriage, the one our whole night began with. The woman who left the garden rather than be beneath is seated in this map beside a consort of her own standing, crowned on the far side of the sheet.
The mystics did not tell it as a romance, and we need not either. What they were doing was bookkeeping of a very old and serious kind. But notice what the bookkeeping concedes. 11 centuries after a playful book sent her over the garden wall, the most solemn minds of the age could not draw the universe without giving her a realm in it and an equal in it. It is the story's oldest argument, settled in the margins of a diagram. The greater book that followed, the Zohar, filled the map in with its slow, dreaming voice. The far country it calls the Sicha Aksa, the other side, and around the lights of the world it describes the Klipot, the husks, the shells, the way a nut is jacketed in what is not nut. And among the husks, it places her household. She moves at night, the Zohar says. That has never changed, from the marshes to Castile. Night was her family's country before it was anyone's fear. Her strength, it adds, runs opposite the moon's. As the moon thins toward darkness, she is most herself, and as it fills, she withdraws. A queen on a tidal sedule, waxing and waning against the sky's own lamp. One much later book, from the 1600s, adds one line more, and we will spend just half a breath on it at full distance. It tells how the dark couple's line was ended, gently and by decree, so that their household should not outnumber the lights. Even the far side of the map, in the end, was given its arithmetic and its limits. Then the books close the subject, and so do we. And here is the thing to carry out of this chapter, the thought it has really been for. A universe mapped this way is not a haunted universe. It is a furnished one. Nothing in it drifts. Nothing is unaccounted for. The dark is not a formless leak into the world, but a province with borders that hold, a government, a queen, whose schedule can be read off the moon like a ferry timetable. The mystics of Castira lay down at night inside a cosmos where even the frightening things had assigned quarters and stayed in them. That is the far side of the map, answered. Not a void, a household. What is worth keeping from all their labour is just that. Everything has its place, including the dark. The dark keeps house too. And a world where the dark keeps house is a world where a person can close the shutters, bank the fire, and sleep. What ordinary families did with all this high cartography, we have already half seen, and will fully see in the next room of the night. They answered it at the level of the cradle, with parchment and psalms, and 3 names in careful ink. Theory above, housekeeping below. It is how every age actually manages. The scholar in Sorja and the mother in Vilna were working the same border from 2 sides, one with a diagram, one with a nail in the wall. Castira is still there, high and wide and thin-aired, and in winter the light on the tiled roofs is the same pale gold the manuscripts soaked in while they were being written. The towns have kept their evenings. Shutters still close early against the plateau cold. Wood smoke still climbs. The sky over the high country still goes a deep banked blue before it goes black, with the moon riding up it on its schedule, finning or filling, exactly as mapped. Somewhere in a library, the little treatise sleeps in its acid-proof box, its iron ink still black,
its far side of the sheet still governed. The mapmaker's candle went out 7 centuries ago, in an orderly manner, we may assume, pinched and not blown, the way a man who files the universe puts out a light. Our lamp is still lit. It has outlasted the candle the way small, faithful things outlast important ones. The map is closed like a book, because it is one. And the whole far country it describes is quiet tonight. Borders holding, households settled, queen and consort keeping their distant state, which is all the map can promise, and enough. And so we come back, at last, to the little square of parchment on the wall where the whole night began. Because for most of the past 1,000 years, this is what the entire story was for. Not the maps, not the diagrams, not the learned arguments. A letter on a wall over a cradle. Everything we have walked through tonight funnels down, in the end, to the size of a nursery. The custom stretched in its day across the whole Jewish world, from Vilna in the north to Casablanca in the south and everywhere between. And it began each time the same way, with a birth. A child arrived. A household reorganized itself around the smallness of it, as households do. And onto the wall, over the mother's bed and over the cradle, went the protection. In the Yiddish-speaking towns, it had a homely, unceremonious name, the Kimput Brevel, the Childbed letter. Sometimes it was a few lines in a plain hand on a slip of paper. Sometimes it was a work of real art, a paper cut, the parchment snipped into lace so that the words sat inside a garden of cut flowers and birds. Written or cut, plain or fine, it was hung with the same motion, a nail, a nod, and then it simply stayed there, doing its work. Which, like the bowl under the threshold long before it, was to lie still and say its piece to anyone and anything that could read. As for what a letter like that says, we can take one down gently because the wall will not mind, and we will put it back, and read it the way borrowed things are held. It opens the way a door opens, with a blessing. Blessed is the name. Then, in many of them, an entire psalm, copied out whole, the psalm of the watchman, the one that promises that your keeper does not doze, that the one minding you will not slumber nor sleep. A psalm which is itself, listened to closely, a lullaby sung upward. Then something lovely and strange, pairs of names, the old couples of the family's deepest past, Adam and Eve, Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebekah, Jacob and Leah, each pair written and marked with one word: within. Come in, that word means. Be present in this room, grandmothers and grandfathers of everyone. There is space by the cradle for all of you. And then, in the same breath, the letter turns to face the other direction and writes the one line the whole night has been walking toward. Lilith and her company, without. Chutz Lilith. Outside Lilith. Not cursed, notice, not fought. Addressed. By name, in her own old name, politely and absolutely, the way a doorkeeper addresses someone for whom the answer is simply no. The family within, the wind without, the door line drawn in ink. And under it, in many letters, one psalm more, the psalm of shelter, the one about wings and shadow, written not as words but folded into strings of single letters, a text packed down tight the way linen is packed in a chest, present in full even where it cannot be read. Around the edge of it all, or ringed around the child's own new name, went the three names we have carried since the shore of the Sea of Reeds: Sonoy, Sansonoy, Semangelof. The three walkers on the beach, keeping their side of the oldest bargain in this story. And in many such houses, there was one book on the shelf that belonged to the same work. Sefer Raziel, the book of the angel Raziel, first printed in Amsterdam in 1701. A book people kept less to read than to have, because having it in the house, it was said, was itself a guard. And some said its printed pages showed the very likenesses of the three. A book as a lamp, in a way. Not consulted, just kept lit. The letter did not always watch alone. In the Ashkenazi towns, the night before a boy's circumcision, held to be the tender night, the one night the old bargain left a seam, was called, plainly, the Vaxnacht, the watch night. And the watching looked like this. The father gathered 10 men, and they sat up in the birthroom by candlelight, studying aloud, unhurried, the words themselves being the sentries. Wine went around, and cake. And at the cradle, this is the detail that has outlasted empires, the children of the family were brought in to say the bedtime Shema beside the baby, small voices reciting over a smaller sleeper. As often as not, one of the reciters would go down mid-verse, asleep against the cradle leg before the last word, and be carried out over a shoulder, and nobody counted it a failure. It was, if anything, proof the room was working.
In the Sephardi world, the same night wore a different name: Brit Yitzhak, the covenant of Isaac.
And its watchers read from the Zohar itself, the dreaming book of the last chapter come down off its shelf to do nursery duty. And someone stayed awake past midnight, and at midnight, the account says, the windows and the doors were drawn close with verses spoken aloud, the house buttoned, room by room, with words. In those Yiddish towns, by the way, her name itself had gone soft in the mouth, worn smooth by daily handling. Not Lilith, but Lilith. 1,000 years inside one lullaby hour of the evening will do that to a name. It wears round like a stare. So the letter, read out whole, says this: Blessed is the name. Your keeper is not sleeping. Family, come in. Lilith, stay out. Wings and shadow packed tight, and 3 walkers from a far shore standing post. That is the entire text, and having read one, we can see what it really is. It is the treaty from the Sea of Reeds, kept on both sides every night for 1,000 years, in ink and paper-cut lace. Where the names are hung, she passes by. Nobody in the house needs to stay afraid, because the whole matter was settled long ago in raging waters between 3 angels and a tired mother of multitudes. And the parchment is simply the treaty's local copy, posted where the other party can read it. One of the letters survives in a museum's keeping and can stand for all of them. Parchment from Germany, painted in the 1800s. About the size of an open book of maps, a handspan less than square. Its text laid out in rings within rings, like ripples in a still pool, with flowers painted between the rings in black and yellow and red on a ground of deep blue, and homely Yiddish worked in among the holy Hebrew. Whoever made it took their time. The compass work is still visible under the ink. It hung in a birthroom once, over some particular cradle, and did its lying still faithfully. And now it lies still under glass instead, rings within rings, keeping a watch it has never been told is over. The room settles then. This room, our room, the one from the very beginning of the night, which was, it is now plain, a room in the middle of that long custom all along. The lamp low, the cradle, the letter on its nail, saying its whole text silently into the dark. Within, without, wings, shadow, 3 names. The child asleep. The house buttoned with words. The wind outside crossing the flat roofs, reading the wall and moving on. There is one more small story to lay beside all the others before sleep, and it is the story of the light from the first day of the world and where it went. It is told in the same old commentaries as everything else tonight, and it is short, and it asks nothing of anyone at all. The light of the first day, the sages said, was not like the light we read by. By that first light, a person could see from one end of the world to the other. No distance in it, no shadow with any real footing, everything visible to everything. The whole world, one lit room. And the world we live in is plainly not lit like that anymore. The proof is available, drowsily, from any bed, in how much of everything cannot presently be seen. So the commentaries asked the obvious, gentle question in their own way, and gave their answer with both hands. The light was not lost, it was hidden. The Holy One, they said, took the first light and put it away, stored it, set it aside, kept it in reserve for the righteous, for a time still to come. Where, they do not say. Putting away places are private, even for heaven. But every household knows the gesture, because every household has one. The high shelf, the back of the deep cupboard, the place where the thing too good for every day is kept safe against a day that will deserve it. Somewhere on the highest of all shelves, in something we may as well imagine as a jar, clay, sealed, unlabeled, needing no label. The first light of the world is put away, still full, still patient. It has been on its shelf for the whole of history. It is on it tonight. We will not be taking it down. It is enough at this hour to know which shelf the house keeps it on. And the first man, who had lived by that light for one single day, spent his first year learning the shape of the ordinary ones. We saw his first night long ago, chapters back. The darkness he thought was the end of everything, and the 2 flints and the small, tame fire. But the year had one more lesson in it, a slower one. As the months turned, he noticed the days themselves growing shorter, each one trimmed a little at both ends, the light arriving later and leaving earlier, as it does for all of us at that season. And he did not yet know that the year is a wheel. He thought the world was dimming for good, and he feared it was on his account. And he did what a person does with a fear that size. He took it seriously. 8 days, the story says, he fasted and kept watch. And then the turn came. The still point at the bottom of the year. the day the trimming stops. And the days began, measurably, patiently, to lengthen again. And he understood, for the second time and for good, this is the way of the world. Evening and morning, winter and spring, the dimming and the return. It had never been about him at all. And in his relief, he did not simply go back to his life. He made the turning a festival, 8 days of it with lights, to be kept at the bottom of every year after, so that the year's darkest week ends, in his house and many houses since, with extra lamps in the doorway, burning against the long night, not in fear of it, but in something much more like fellowship. It is the same lesson the Flints taught grown up. First he learned that a night can be sat through, and then he learned that a whole winter can, and that the sitting through goes better with company, and lights, and something like a holiday made out of the very thing that was feared. Laid beside that little story, the whole night's walk shows itself, softly, with no need to hold the thought, as one story wearing different clothes. A wind over the marshes, given a name so it could be lived with. A maiden in a tree trunk, let go into the open air. A woman made of earth who chose the wind, and the treaty on the shore that made her choosable. A word resting in a verse, a letter buried in a bowl, a map with a governed far side, a paper-cut garden on a nursery wall. Every age took the oldest fact there is, that the night is large and we are small, and we must sleep in it anyway, and folded it into whatever it made best. Incantations, bowls, diagrams, lace. None of them are instructions for fighting the dark. All of them are furniture for living next to it. That is the whole craft this story teaches, and every generation has passed it down the same way. Quietly, at bedtime, over a cradle. And her own story, hers in particular, has one more room, and we are in it. In our own time, within living memory, she has been welcomed back. A scholar in the early 1970s retold the old tale so that Lilith and Eve, the first woman and the second, finally meet. Not as rivals over one garden, but as friends, talking over the wall. And that retelling has been read and reread ever since. And since 1976, there has been a magazine that carries her name on its cover, issue after issue, year after year, in honour of exactly the quality that once sent her over the wall. Her refusal to be the lesser of two people made from the same ground. Somewhere tonight, likely enough, a copy of it lies on somebody's kitchen table with a coffee ring on the cover, which is the modern way a name is kept in a household. Not framed, just around. The woman the old books wrote at the edges of the map has, in the newest books, been invited in and given the good chair. The three names stay on the nursery wall, because customs are not in a hurry. But the person they address has been, in many houses, simply forgiven, or better than forgiven, understood. Stories can do this. It only takes them a few thousand years. So nothing in this long account was ever really lost. That is the finding of the whole night, and the little story of the light was its plainest telling. The first brightness, folded away, kept. Her name, folded into a verse, a bowl, a margin, kept. The old fears, folded into letters and lace, kept until they went soft, kept until they became keepsakes. This story's people never destroyed much of anything. They were folders and keepers, jar sealers, shelf stockers, wrappers of small things in wool. The world they have handed down to this room is a deep cupboard, full and quiet. And the lamp, our lamp, low now, the way a lamp gets toward the end of its oil and its evening, is, in a manner of speaking, a borrowed coal of that first hidden brightness, the working, everyday, thumbnail-sized portion of a light whose fullness is put away upstairs. It does not miss the jar. It has the room, and the room is enough. The letter keeps the wall. The child keeps the cradle. The high shelf keeps its sealed clay, patient as coral. And the house stands inside the dark, the way a lit window stands in it. A small, steady thing, completely unafraid. The room again. The same one.
It was always going to be the last room of the night,
Because it was the first. The low ceiling, the plastered walls, the cradle, the square of parchment on its nail, and the oil lamp, much lower now, burning the last of its evening the way the night burns the last of itself, slowly, without complaint. Everything the night carried through this room is at rest where we left it. The marshes are still standing in the far south of that flat country, thinned and renamed and standing, and the reed houses creak on their islands like moored boats. And the wind that gave her half her name is crossing them now, this hour, finding nothing to hurry for. The river that once carried a tree to a young goddess is still carrying small things gently downstream, none of them urgent. The terracotta lady rests on her lions in the dark of a closed gallery, owls at her shoulders, keeping the night shift she has kept for 4,000 years. The two flints lie wherever the first man laid them down, and the fire they started has come down to us wick by wick, and one small portion of it is here, in this room, in clay, at rest. The desert of owls is quiet. The ruined watchtower has its tenant, and she has her tower, and the verse that granted her rest is resting too, flat on its old page, under the glass in Jerusalem, in the dark of a closed museum, dreaming in the plural. The bowls of the flat country lie face up now in their cases in Philadelphia, their long spiral letters finished forever. And Emi, daughter of Kaji, is remembered kindly by strangers, which is more than most of us will manage. The glass floor holds its one coin of lamplight. The high, cold towns of Castilla have shut their shutters, and the far side of the map is governed, borders holding, household settled, the moon keeping the schedule for everyone. And the letters, all the letters, the childbed letters, the paper-cut gardens, the rings within rings, are hanging on their nails across the whole width of the old world, saying their text into the dark the way this one is saying it now, a few feet from the cradle, within, without, wings, shadow, 3 names. And she is at her shore, at the edge of the world, where the desert meets the warm sea, where she chose to be. The mangroves hold their green rooms over the shallows. The tide is doing one of its two patient things. The treaty is kept, on both sides, tonight as every night. The names are on the wall. She passes by. There has never been anything in this room for her to trouble, and there is nothing now. The wind comes to the door and reads the wall and moves on. And that is the whole of the visit. And it ends well, as it has ended well 10,000 nights running. The jar of the first light is on its shelf, still sealed, still full. It is not for tonight, and that is all right. Tonight has a lamp. The lamp is nearly done. The flame has gone small and blue at its root, the size of a word, and the room does not need more than that. The ink on the parchment has been dry for 100 years. The wall holds the parchment holds the names, and the names, as they have all along, hold the door. The child in the cradle is breathing slowly. The house is breathing slowly. The wind outside has moved on across the roofs. There is an old blessing said at this hour in a low voice once. It goes this way. In the name of the God of Yisrael, Michael at my right hand, Gavriel at my left. Before me, Uhiel. Behind me, Raphael. And above my head, over all of it, the presence of peace. 4 quiet watchers at the 4 sides of a bed, and something gentler than any of them overhead. The room is guarded the way the whole long story guarded everything, softly, with names in the dark. Nothing more is asked of anyone tonight. Sleep is allowed now. It was allowed all along. It was the whole idea. The marshes rest. The river runs unwatched. The shore keeps its own counsel, and the lamp keeps the room. The flame leans and straightens and stays.